You can just start by giving a short intro of yourself and do just.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kleanthi Georgala. It's a quite difficult name because it's Greek, so you have any right to pronounce it not correctly, but I also have the right to forget names, so please give me some time. And I come from Greece, but currently I live in Netherlands, particularly in Leiden, where I work as in the Linkage team with the mining group. And I'm here to make you a small presentation about the project I've been working on the last year. And it's called Traces Through Time. And it has been developed under the supervision of Dr. Arno Knobe in collaboration with a colleague of mine, Benjamin van der Burg. This project was in collaboration from three different parties. First, we have the National Archives, which is an organization located in the United Kingdom. And apart from other things, their main goal is to store and maintain a huge volume of data, of historic data, that comes mostly from what we call now the United Kingdom, but in medieval times, you had England, you had Wales, you had Scotland, that they were separated. And these were the people that basically provide us with the data. And then we have our team in Leiden, and presentation mostly is going to be about what we did in this work, but I'm also going to give a brief overview about the whole project. And finally, we collaborated also with a team from experts from Brighton University, that they helped us parse the data that we already have. So, the main goal of the project was to identify occurrences from data sources that belong to the same period of time. And by the same period of time, we are talking about data from the medieval period, from the early modern period, and modern data, First World War and Second World War. And the idea was to identify those occurrences, find the name entities behind those occurrences, and then see and observe what was their progress through time, the different roles, the different occupation, the name changes that they had, and their relations with other individuals of that period of time. So let's just start by giving you a small idea of how the text looked like. So, my team in Leiden mostly focused on the medieval and the early modern data, and the people from TNA, the corresponding scientific group, work with the modern data. So here we have a manuscript. I don't know if you can see it. This is medieval. Some of the words are Old English or some Newer English, and in collaboration with a team of historians from King's College that took those manuscripts and then transformed it into a format that can be processed by computer. So this thing is this, basically. And here we have identified an occurrence, which is Margaret the Redverse, which was originally written like this in text. I have to say that the data was contributed by TNA, and in a previous project that they had in collaboration with King's College, they digitized those data. But this is, let's say, step 0 of our project, and it was already done before us for us. So here is a more analytical overview of the whole idea of the project. So before I get more technical, it's good that you have an idea of what we basically did, what were the different parts of the work. So step number 0 was retrieving the data and converting it into a digitized format. It was XML. Then, given two different data sources, that they have to be from the same period of time, or this data source could be even the same. Our collaboration team in Brighton parse the data and obtain occurrences from that data. And once the occurrences were obtained, they transformed it in a tabular format where each row was an occurrence itself. And each of the columns were the attributes, or as mostly known in record linkage, the identifiers. And I'm going to give you further on an insight about what were these attributes. So once the occurrences were transformed into a tabular format, they were given as input to a record linker. And this is our main contribution in the project. So for the moment, let's just say that we gave them as input and there is an output, and I'm going to give you more technical details about how it works and what are the different stages of the linkage process. So we give them as input and we have an output that looks like a network of the different individuals that we found in text. And the representation was somewhat of a graph where the vertices were the people, the occurrences that we found, and the edges between them were links that they either saw the different types of relations between the individuals, or mostly they were a weighted score that shows how certain we are that two vertices that are connected through an edge, a weighted edge, could be the same person. So we took advantage of the way that the data, the occurrences, were naturally distributed in this graph, and we saw that there are some little subgraphs, like the ones you see here and here, that they were strongly connected. There were strongly connected vertices inside those subgraphs, and they were not really strongly connected with other subgraphs. So we performed a step of the duplication, and we ended up having, again, a tabular format of people this time, which are the named entities that they were behind, let's say, the occurrences that we found in text. So, as I already give it away, our part of this for this project was the record linkage part, where we created a probabilistic record linker. And as I believe that most of you know what record linkage is, which is record linkage tries to find the solution to the problem that given two different files or one file does this records of either people, events, or object reference to the same person, the same object, or the same event. And in bibliography, you will find it with a couple of different names, but the main idea is it's the same. So, as I said at the beginning, apart from being in charge for the record linker of the project, we were also in charge of seeing how the system works with the medieval data and the early modern data. And I was mostly in charge of the early modern text, which was 15th to 18th century. There were a lot of challenges in the data that make it even more interesting for us. So, first of all, we had a lot of missing attributes at each occurrence that we found. There was this idea in medieval times, because there was a smaller population, so if you name somebody Joseph, there's not going to be another Joseph. And if there is another Joseph, then you just have to give him a more detailed identification by saying that he is the son of George, and that was it. Sorry for that. And then there were people in the early modern text that they had different roles around that time. They would become being a servant, then at the end they would get another role and become a magister, and so on and so on. We had a lot of spelling variations in the text, and it was basically there were names that they were the same, but depending on the author of the manuscript, depending on where he came from, he would spell a name differently. For example, you can have Alice with one L and you can have it with two L's, or you can have it with a Y instead of an I, and for them it was different. Sorry, for them it was basically the same name. We had a lot of name abbreviations in the data. The idea is that once you name somebody, you give the full name, and by full name it could be Sir Robert Williams. Then when you mention that person again, you don't have to say his whole name. You can say Rob or Robert or Rob or something, and then Williams. And they know, and they knew at that time that this person was the person that they referenced beforehand. And finally, there were a lot of typos because most of the data that we were dealing with were from Parliament's hearings. So there was one person that was writing down what it has been said in the Parliament of the Lords, and because he was trying to write everything, he might write really quickly and miss things out, and misspell things. And finally, one interesting part that was mostly found in the early modern texts is that when somebody was Sir John Smith, so if you were a Sir at that time, you were someone important. You did something good for your country. So the Queen said, you should be a knight. But if you start doing other things more important, the Queen might think that thought that it would be a great idea if we give you a role. So you're not just Sir John Smith now, you're the Earl of Oxford because you deserve it. And suddenly you have a mention of Sir John Smith constantly in the text because he was somebody important. And suddenly, without having a death record, you stop seeing that person and you start seeing Earl of Oxford. No further information, or information such that Sir John Smith was given the title of Earl of Oxford. You just see two different people, completely nothing in common, but being linked with the same people and being referenced the same amount of times in the text as Sir John Smith was. So, once we obtained the appearances and our friends from Brighton transformed them into a tabular format, well, before we transformed in a tabular format, we had a discussion with the NLP experts and also with the historians that digitized the records. And we asked them, we want to have occurrences that they are split into attributes. But we're dealing with 3 different time periods, and we find something that can work for all those periods because we want to create a record linker that takes an input and it doesn't take into consideration the quality of the data, let's say, or where does the data comes from. And they said to us that the most common identifiers, attributes, were listed here. So first you have titles, which are like Sir, Mr., Lady. You have first names, you have articles. Well, articles mostly belong to people that they did not come from the United Kingdom, because we had references of people that they were from France or from Spain, that they were either salesmen or they were like ambassadors to the United Kingdom at that time. So you could see somebody named Camillo de Vries, for example. So de was the article at that point, hola, or le. Then we have last names, roles. Well, the distinction between what's a title and what's a role, it can be tricky because a role can stand by itself. You don't need to say the first name or the last name of the person. As I said to you in my example previously, you have the Earl of Oxford. That's enough to describe an individual. Where the Sir, it must be accompanied with at least a forename and a last name. And then we had occupations such as servant or knight. Again, the distinction between an occupation and a role, it's tricky, but they were, let's say, rule-based NLP that managed to identify that for us. And finally, we have the provenance. That provenance either says that this person comes from that place, or he's known for his actions in that place. So, Sir Thomas of York, it either means that Sir Thomas comes from York, or that he resides right now there, and he has a title there. He has a role in the community there.
Does it mean that if Sir Thomas went to another place, his name would change? So like Sir Thomas of Newcastle or something?
No, because they thought, well, it depends actually. It's not we cannot say with 100% certainty that they were changing the provenance. They were trying to find ways to identify people. In early modern, they were identifying people better than they did in medieval time. So most of the times when somebody was of York, it could mean that he comes from York. It means that he comes from York, and probably he wouldn't go somewhere outside York, because because his father was probably somebody important. He's also important, so he's like lord there, let's say.
Okay.
So, and one of the biggest surprises that we have was that even though we identified those attributes, we had a lot of missing values. And I will show you later what the frequency of those attributes were, especially in the early modern data. So, let's get a bit more technical. Here is a small section from a text from the domestic state papers of the Elizabethan period. Comes from the early modern data. And here we have identified Sir W.M. Sarrington, which is an occurrence of a person. And following the previous pattern of breaking this occurrence into useful attributes, you see something like this. So we have a title, that's Sir. We have a forename that after the NLP team performed reasoning found out that WM can be considered William. And we have a surname that is Sarrington. And you can see that we also have some older data, but this data is just metadata, is extra information about the occurrence that we found. And some of them, like the gender here, are used to dissolve the conflicts between people. So you have somebody that's a male and another occurrence that's a female, you're not going to try to match them.
How do you figure out the gender? Using the data directly? So like William is always a male? How do you figure that out?
That was the job of NLP,
okay,
but they already, as far as I know, they already have a system from another work that they had a list of names, female and male, and some ones that could be both. But at that period of time, it was really easy to say that this is a guy, this is a girl. And most of the times in the data, we had men. And they performed reasoning, they used that system. I think it's based on semi-supervised learning. And they could identify that Sir William was male.
And how do you get William? Do you have also a dictionary for abbreviations, or do you have some kind of rules when William occurs somewhere before the WM, then you suppose that this is William?
As far as I know, because the NLP part was done by the Brighton University team, they did both. They consider that when somebody's already mentioned 2 lines or 2-3 sections before, then WM, so
there's some match on the characters, and you
you have a distance that says if you find him before 2 sections or 3 sections, and you have a whole name like Sir William Sarrington, so WM is William, and then they did observations about what's the common abbreviations for names. Because WM is probably William, but you also can get W's, and W's can be Walter. So as far as I know, that's what they did. I forgot to mention something little, is that these list of attributes were the attributes that we were searching for within the data because they play the basic role when it comes to matching between a pair of occurrences. And the extra data is, as I said, just metadata or data that resolves conflicts. This ID was randomly generated, for example. It's just to say at the end when we have the graphical representation, instead of writing all the information about the occurrence, you just identify the verdicts with the ID. So here comes the fun part. And here I will have to become a bit more technical. And as I said at the beginning, our work as being part of the Leiden University team was to develop a probabilistic record linkage that takes the data that I just showed you in the tabular format and outputs links, let's just say, between the different occurrences, and we're by trying to identify which of those occurrences could be referencing to the same person. So, since we're working with the probabilistic record linkage, the first idea was, when I say match occurrences with its other pair of occurrences, what I actually mean was compare these occurrences. And by comparing occurrences, I mean compare the matching attributes, of course, since we already have them in a nice tabular format. So the first thing is to identify those subset of occurrences, was to identify the subset of attributes that they are useful for our system, and is the one I showed you in the list previously. And first we resolve conflicts like this is a male, this is a female, they cannot be matched. So we move on to the next pair of occurrences. And once we end up with the subset of occurrences that can be matched to a given occurrence, we firstly, for each pair of those occurrences, we identify the subset of attributes that they are matchings, where both of them have values. So, for example, we have a previous example that I showed you, Sir William Sarrington, and then we have another occurrence that is Sir Sarrington. So they have two matching attributes. They have a title and a surname, but the first occurrence has a forename. Since the second occurrence doesn't have a forename, we are not going to consider it. So once we have identified the matching subset of attributes, we gather probabilities for those attributes. So we have Sir, which is it was a quite common. Yes, a question? Okay. Where that was a very common title at that time. We had a lot of people named Sir. And then we have Sarrington, which was a quite uncommon British name at that time. So, now the question is, where did you get those numbers, those lovely numbers? And the answer is, the numbers basically represent how frequent was that value within a source. And the source can be two things. First, it can be the text itself. So we gather from the titles, we gather all the different values that we find and we compute their probability. But this is a bit problematic because the text that we were dealing with was including high repetitions of particular people. And of course, it wasn't including the whole population of the United Kingdom. It was including people that they were important to the crown. So you get somewhat of a biased probability. But I will show you later that this is not actually a problem on what we're doing. The best thing that you can do though is to gather probability from a deduplicated index. And in the early modern period, we did have that. That was let's say, a reference index or something. But you get a better estimation of the name of the distribution of the first names or the last names or the titles. And of course, it's really important that given the different time periods that you want to find occurrences and dereference them, you have to use an index or that comes from the same period of time. Because I can say that the distribution of names did not change first names between the medieval and the early modern. The top 10 places were the same mostly. But when it comes to titles, or for example, last names, we did not have many last names from the medieval period. It's really important that you use, you obtain the probabilities from a source of that same period of time. So, we found the subset of attributes that they're matching, we found their probabilities, and we have obtained them. And now we do a small step that is called assuming dependence, which is going to raise a lot of questions, and I'm going to be happy to answer them afterwards. But this is something that we are dealing right now, of not assuming independence, and I will show you later about our future work on, and our current and future work about this assumption. And then the next step is to estimate how many of the individuals can have these same characteristics as the ones that we found. How many people can have a title Sir and surname Sarrington. So, since we assume independence between attributes, we multiply the two values that we found, and we make an estimation of the population. That's 1 million. But this population is the people that dereference entities that were mentioned in the text, not the whole population of the United Kingdom. And we multiply the probability with the size of the population, and we find out that there's 49 people with those characteristics. This is not a good number. We cannot say with a high certainty that this guy and this guy are the same. And for our final step, we estimate how confident we are about it, which is taking the amount of people that we find and divided by 1. Divided 1 by the number of individuals. And we see this number here, that it's quite low. So our first assumption that there are a lot of people with those characteristics matches our final assumption that we are not really sure that these people could be actually the same.
Sorry, may I ask you
Yes?
a question? So these 49 individuals are 49 occurrences, or?
Yes, occurrences.
Okay, so, and the estimated size of population, this would also be occurrences?
Entities.
These are entities, okay.
Yes.
So, but if you have only 49 individuals, then isn't this a high probability that, so let's say, I don't know how many, did you say how many occurrences there were for these 1 million entities? Because you need to make a mapping, so you have, let's say, 50 million occurrences, and then you say, okay, 1 million entities, persons, out of this.
It's still not a very good estimation, but I was going to say that now, we don't take the confidence score so literal. So I gave you a number. I haven't compared with anything else that we have found, because if 49 is one of the lowest numbers, is one of the highest numbers that we find when we make comparisons. So I'm saying to you right now, this is low. But if all the other numbers that we have are higher than this, then we can say that we are quite sure. It's really relative how you interpret the confidence score.
There's more a thresholding factor.
Yes. It's. I was just going to explain this. Just give me a second. So the confidence score. There are a couple of problems with this. One is the probabilities. Most of the times you have a text, so the probabilities are biased. Because you have repetitions of names that belong to important people, VIPs. If you could imagine what is the distribution of, let's say you have the name entities, you put them in the horizontal axis, and you have the frequency of those entities in the vertical axis, then you will see a Zipf's distribution. So there's a very small amount of people that they will keep repeating it. One of them was the Queen Elizabeth. You had the Queen Elizabeth mentioned so many times inside the text. So that's one thing. The second thing that it's really hard is to find the population. We make an estimation of 1 million. The historians told us that it's good, but you cannot generalize it. You cannot say that this was in the medieval, or that if you take text from not the domestic papers, from the colonial papers, that it was the communications between the United Kingdom and their colonies, the estimation should be lower. So what we suggest is that when you have an occurrence and you want to find its matches, take the output and put it in a ranked list based on their scores. So what most of the linkers do is that they output something like a number, like we have here, and they treat it in a binary manner, match, non-match. We suggest no, let's not do that. Let's allow you to see the ranked list, and you can put the threshold where you think it's enough or not. So it's more generalized for different time periods, from different data sets, for different probabilities, or for different estimations of the populations. So just an insight what happens with a confidence score is that when you get a confidence score of 1, you have exactly one person. When your confidence go lower, you have 2 people, and when it goes even lower, you start having 10 people. So the lower it gets, in a way, the less confident you start to become. And the higher it goes, it means that you start to become more confident that these 2 people could be the same. And the score can go higher if you have well-defined occurrences, and I'm going to show you an example. And if the attribute values are rare, so they have a lower probability. And the confidence score goes down when you have less well-defined occurrences, or occurrences that they have very common names. So if you want to match Sarah John Smith, I can assure you that all of those values have a very high probability. John was a very popular name. Smith still is a popular surname in the United Kingdom. And Sir, there were a lot of people in the text mentioned as Sir. So if you match it with itself, you're going to have a confidence score of 0.0001 or something. So did I answer your question?
No. Actually not. I'm still wondering if you have the Queen Elizabeth, who occurs quite often. So, but Queen Elizabeth should have very high confidence, right? Because Queen, if you have something like Queen, this is.
It's a bit tricky because.
So let me see. This is like, because this measures actually. I'm not sure what you presented measures, because the number of occurrences of a name does not say anything about the correctness, right? So Queen Elizabeth is very can be disambiguated easily, of course, very often. And if you have somebody with a unique name, then and you occurs only twice, then you will also be able to disambiguate it very precisely.
Yes.
Because the name is so unique. So these are the 2, and it has nothing to do with how often it occurs in the text, actually.
In a way, it does, because the confidence, it's this estimation, where the n is multiplying the probabilities, and then multiplying by 1 million, which 1 million is the same for all the pairs that you have. So in a way, if you have probabilities that they're quite high, so for example, Queen was constantly repeated in the text because there was a lot of mentions of the Queen. It was her kingdom. So you will have a high number here. So even if you know that Queen Elizabeth and Queen Elizabeth are one person, when you have so many repetitions of the attribute queen, this number is going to be big. So therefore, the confidence score is going to be low. Because what it says here is that you might have 1,000 of individuals, 1,000 mentions of the Queen Elizabeth. I understand what you're saying in a logical manner, that it might not make sense in a way that you know that Queen Elizabeth is only one person.
Well, that's basically adding a priori knowledge to the model, and that's the problem when you do. Well, you know, the fact that you know that there's only one queen is a priori knowledge that you don't have in text, because you don't know there's only one Smith that was valid for the whole text. Then you can disaggregate John Smith, basically because you know the cities only had one Smith, one Goldsmith or whatever, and whoever was called Goldsmith was always the same guy. You could, but you don't have that a priori knowledge.
No.
So, I mean, it's always a problem. The more knowledge you put into this aggregation, the better, easier it gets. The Queen example is a great example for that. But it doesn't work when you try to build a generic model with not that much a priori knowledge.
And at the end, basically, the evaluation of the output was made by the historians, or is going to be made by the historians. That they already have an explanation of how the system works, and this low probability, this low confidence score was something that made total sense to them based on what of how our system works. So, any questions about the confidence score? Okay, I will proceed to my final example. So here we have Rob, Southwell, Serif of Ken. This is a very nice, well-defined occurrence. The first name is Robt. That it's, let's say, not quite the probable name. Not Robert, Robt again. Last name Southwell, also not really common. And then you have the title that it's Serif of Kent. That was also not very common. And titles generally were not really that common at that time. So when we compare it to itself, because we found an exact same reference, you see that it gets a very high score. And that has to do with, in our case, with the attribute probabilities. And also the fact that this occurrence gives us a lot of information because it's complete in a way, it's well defined. You can say that, you can see that this person could only be him. And then we find another set of occurrences that some would look like Rob Southwell, Serif of Kent. So with the first occurrence, we have a matching of a first name and last name. And this one has a title, this one has a role. So you see that suddenly the score goes really down. And then we have another two occurrences that they have a matching, that they match in first names and last names, but the first names are similar, they're not the same, they're similar, and the score goes even a bit down again, it goes lower. So what somebody can get from this is that the linker prioritizes or assigns higher ranks to occurrences that they have the same subset of attribute field, but it also pays attention to the fact, considers that these two pair of occurrences would get a higher score if their values were very similar. So, as I said at the beginning, we were facing a lot of challenges in the text, and we needed to find a way to do not end up doing something that is a bit more deterministic, like doing exact matches between characters. So we allowed the algorithm to incorporate some different similarity functions, like the ones you see here, using different thresholds, in order to perform somewhat of fuzzy matching between the attribute values. So we used a couple of edit distance functions that could easily assume that these two strings can be the same, and they were actually the same, but one part of United Kingdom wrote the Glusterstep and the other wrote the Glusestep. So that was what the system actually can do. The question now is, does it do what you said? And how can we see what progress you've made, and does it actually work? So when you're dealing with historic data, is that you have a lot of data. Within a lot of data, the data is challenging, but the problem is that you don't have a golden standard. Most of the cases, you need to get a group of historians, tell them that they will have to evaluate your system. And that's work in progress right now. But we needed something to see what we're doing, if what we're doing actually is producing good results. So we decided to start creating artificial data. But even though we created the artificial data, we wanted to make the data look realistic. And we did the opposite thing of what we were doing right now. Now we are trying to identify named entities, and we have occurrences. And with the artificial data, we created artificial entities, and then we start creating occurrences from that we already know that belong to the same person, and we evaluated our system based on this. So basically, the artificial data was developed using information from the state papers. So we observed how frequent the attributes are, and we found out that half of the occurrences have title and first name. Most of the occurrences have a last name, and the articles were not really common because they were just mentions of people from different countries. And when you're dealing with domestic paper, the data that is about British Empire, what we call now United Kingdom, you wouldn't get a lot of different foreign people. The rules were somewhat present, and provenances not really that much. So we created well-defined entities, and then in order to create the occurrences, we start taking out, so you have an entity, well-defined, and we start taking out attributes. So for example, we have Lady Mary Jane of York. Title, first name, last name, provenance. So we exclude the provenance and have Lady Mary Jane, for example. Then, to make the data more realistic, we start doing spelling variations. So Mary could be written with an A, but it could also be written with an A and I. And finally, we start using abbreviations in names. So now, we don't only exclude the title. With God Made It Gorgeous, we also do an abbreviation of the name here. So, as I showed you here, we had 6 different similarity functions. I think you're quite familiar with what they do. And we created different sets of artificial entities and extracted occurrences with the way that I showed you in the previous slide. And then we wanted to test whether our system can identify which subset of occurrences belongs to the same entities. So we ran experiments for the 4 similarity functions using different thresholds. We obtained the best one, and then we presented the results in an RC graph, where we found out that the distance function, Dammenau-Levenstein, allowing only up to 3 transpositions, was performing best, was giving us the better results than the other. Absolute and Soundex had quite low results, which was, you can easily understand it. I have to mention here, and sorry that I forgot about it, but the spelling variations and the name abbreviations that we introduced were not really that high. We did not create 50% of occurrences that had abbreviations. But still, with that very small amount, absolute distance is this one. It's not performing really well. And then the difference between Levenstein and Dammenau-Levenstein was very little, but because of things like this. That would allow perform a bit, just a bit better. Data Winkler was somewhat okay, let's say. It's an also. Yeah, Data Winkler is this one here. QGrams was quite naive, and it had a very, very small threshold. So basically what happened is that it needed a small threshold to identify similar values, but that meant that it would allow a lot of things that they should not be matched to be matched. And Soundtext was okay, but Soundtext when you don't transpose A and E, for example, into E and A, it works. It doesn't really work well. So if you transpose L with M or K, then you start having a problem, and Soundtext could not figure that out. So this is the work that we have been doing so far. The project ended around March, where we also had the release conference in London. And now, until the end of May, we're free to do some more research ideas that we wanted to implement. So one thing that we didn't really like was the fact that we make an assumption at the beginning that the attributes are independent. They're not. And we did some experiments, and we had an intuition at the beginning, and we found out that there is a somewhat correlation between especially the first names and the last names. So when you have Patrick, it's quite possible that this Patrick is a Murphy because he comes from Ireland. So what we before I continue, do you have any questions about the current work I showed you? Anything you want to go back and see? Okay, so we wanted to represent in a matrix the first names and the last names. And once we put them into a random order of rows and of columns, we found, we saw that we basically represented them in this table where the blue cells represent that there is a value. So the first name one was found with the surname 3, for example. And this is a bit fuzzy. But because we had this intuition that some subset of first names and some subset of last names should be together because either they come from a particular region of the United Kingdom or either they share the same role, let's say, because it was more common that people with that belong to the same family, so you have this inheritance of names and surnames when you belong with the same family, could get the same titles, because it was more probable that if your father was a Sir, you would probably end up being Sir or a Lord, for example. So what we are hoping to get is that if we rearrange the columns and the rows at the same time, and this is called by clustering, we will end up with a matrix that looks like this. So here you have common British first names and common British last names. It's going to be a big cluster, since most of the people mentioned in those documents were British, from England, let's say, but now it's England. And then we're going to have a smaller cluster where we're going to have Irish names, and then an even smaller cluster where we're going to have a bit of foreign names. Even though the previous, in our previous work with the probabilistic linear, we were working with medieval and early modern data. For this now, we are working mostly with modern data. and modern data comes from catalogs of people that participated in the First World War and the Second World War. And it's basically just a tabular format, so it's much easier to obtain first names and last names than it was from the different two data sets. So these are very high hopes. We want something like this, but what we basically have is something like this. So you have a lot of common. So you have some common British names, never found with some other common last names, and you have some things here which is weird, which is just noise. You have an Irish first name with a British last name. So this makes the work a bit more difficult for us. So the idea, as I said before, is to take as input something that looks like this, or even worse, something that looks like this, and try to cluster together the rows and the columns, the first names and the last names. And this technique is called by-clustering. Of course, the technique, the name gives it away, it's clustering, so we have to answer the same questions as in clustering. How many clusters do you expect to see? Well, the good thing is that after doing some research with TNA, we found out that the people, the different ethnicity groups that participated as for the British in the war came from 7 major groups that had different background. Do you allow overlapping clusters? There are algorithms that do that, but in by-clustering, most of the times when you say about overlapping, it's allowing one column or one row, so one last name or one first name to belong in 2 different categories, which was quite common. Because as you can see here, yes, we know that quite Irish name can mostly belong with Irish last name, but you can have a British name. It's okay. And the question really is, what do you expect the groups to look like at the end? Because we have an intuition that it has to do with where they come from, where people come from. But most of the cases, and based on the observations I have done so far, most of the clusters don't really share the same location. They share roles. So it was mostly common that people with same names for some reason, because it could be son and father, had the same level in military. But the good thing is that since by-clustering is actually clustering, you let the data speak for itself. You just distribute it, you rearrange the columns to find the best way to represent clusters, and then you go and see what the data has to say for you. You don't have to ask your questions beforehand. So here is an intuition about how the actual data look like. So we have roughly, that's the small data set, okay? We have roughly 1,000 unique names and 12,000 unique last names. And the amount of pairs is 50,000, but the unique pairs are 30,000. So when you want to create a matrix to represent the first names as the rows and the last names as the columns, you end up with a matrix that has around 12 million cells, where only 30,000 of them are filled. So you end up with a very sparse matrix. And this makes the whole idea more challenging. But the problem is that the existing algorithms of by-clustering right now are mostly developed for biological data, where the rows were genes and the columns were conditions. And most of the matrices are not sparse, because they know that every gene that they have is observed after a particular condition, and they know that it has a value. In our case, it doesn't work like this. So if we want to give our data as input to the existing by-clustering techniques, we need to find ways to make the data less sparse, because at the end you end up with clusterings that you cannot interpret at any other case. So one idea is to reduce the matrix dimensions, create equivalence classes of first names and last names, because you see a lot of spelling variations or abbreviations in the catalogs. And the other thing that we're doing right now, that it's in under construction, is that we are trying to create artificial data, like create perfect clusterings and trying to introduce noise or randomly remove values from the perfect clusters and see how those algorithms, when the algorithms that they exist, start to really fall apart. So to sum things up, as being part of the Linkage data mining group, I have been working with 2 other people on the front of traces through time, and we have created a probabilistic record linkage that was tested in 3 different periods of time, and medieval and modern data. The main idea was to link together occurrences and output the results in ranked list. So for each occurrence you get a ranked list of other occurrences that it smarts together based on the confidence score. And as I showed you previously, the linker tends to assign the higher confidence scores values between occurrences that have the same amount of subset of attributes filled, and preferably with similar values. The good thing for the algorithm was that because it includes a fuzzy matching by incorporating different similarity functions, we are able to deal with the challenges of the data, such as name abbreviation and spelling variations. We have introduced the idea of creating ranked lists instead of assigning matches or non-matches between sets. So therefore, it can be easily understood by somebody that it's not a computer scientist, somebody that just likes to work with history, that somebody comes from digital humanities or even just the area of humanities. And the basic downside is that we are assuming independence between attributes, but this is something that we have been worried and warned right from the beginning, and we are trying to resolve it now with the bi-clustering algorithms. So thank you very much for the presentation.